the reason people move here, it's one of the reasons I moved here, was for the greater sense of permanence in place, and we want to preserve and improve that while still fostering a growth environment.
This is Chattanooga Civics. I'm Nathan Bird. I'd like to thank my patrons for supporting the show, especially the Marks family and Stephen Culp. If you're enjoying the show or the newsletter, I'd like to invite you to become a patron by visiting patreon.com/chatcivics.
Thanks, Nathan, for this opportunity. My name is Erik Schmidt. I'm the Director of Sustainability with the City of Chattanooga in the City Planning Office, and glad to be here to talk with you today.
Thanks for being here. And so we're here to talk about the Climate Action Plan that's being proposed. As we're recording, it's going before a public presentation at City Council tonight and then a vote next week. That's correct?
That's correct, yep. On the
March 28th.
Yep.
So hopefully this episode will be out before the vote takes place and people will have a chance to contact their representative and everything. But if you could just start by giving us a brief overview of the plan. From what I've read, there's 4 categories and 6 goals, and these are the kind of things that the city is really putting out there as the 10 main points, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and they're not terribly surprising with everyday life. They're sort of apparent. So the 6 goals, we start with a goal of equitably implementing this plan across the community where we see disparities economically, socially, and otherwise that translate into vulnerabilities for those communities when they're put under additional stressors. So that's a top line item for us. The second goal, which is one of the primary drivers of this, and that's reaching carbon neutrality for the municipal government operations by 2040. And we're going to strive to achieve a carbon neutral existence by 2050 on a community-wide basis. The following goal is a sort of similarly framed up goal, which is a zero waste community by 2050 and zero waste municipal operations by 2040. The fourth goal is just to build a more sustainably designed city, so more walking, biking, interconnected multimodal transportation options, as well as improvement of systems for single vehicle transportation as well, just doing all of that better. Anything from that to hubs and corridors, how we design and build larger communities. So that's the theme of that. The fifth is preserving and improving the natural resource integrity of the surrounding area. It's part and parcel, and one of the biggest identification things for Chattanooga. It's the greatest outdoor city in America. And then lastly, which is also very much a current theme across the country and the world, which is being a leader in the green economy. We're perfectly poised to take advantage of that. We already have a lot of anchor business here, and there's continuing to be more interest every day in Chattanooga as people explore where they want to put down their headquarters, and so we want to be that place for them.
Awesome. Well, I want to start out with kind of a really broad overview and talk about how this plan was written. Who was in the room, how was input and feedback taken into account, because this is going to take, the one thing that jumps out to me almost immediately is net zero carbon emissions. Even just for city operations, that's a huge, huge goal that's going to take multi-departmental coordination. And so walk us through this process, how this plan was put together and who was in the room.
Sure. I would say it's hard to really nail that down in practical terms. There have been conversations since the late 60s, early 70s in terms of Chattanooga's sort of rebirth and reinvention of itself coming out of the steel industry prior to air quality controls and water quality controls that really erased Chattanooga's beauty from vision, and so all the community leaders that came together to reestablish a new Chattanooga. You can't have this interview without mentioning that. In my mind, it takes decades of collaboration and cooperation and vision to get us things like the riverfront and the Chattanooga River Park, South Chickamauga Greenway, all that kind of thing. So just giving recognition to that. In 2009, the city came out with a climate action plan under Mayor Littlefield's administration, did a greenhouse gas inventory back then, and a recap of that later on showed that 90+% of those action items were addressed in some form or fashion. So fast forward 10 years, where there were some steps along the way. A 2012 executive order we'll talk a little bit about later, to Mayor Burke's administration joining the Better Buildings Challenge with the United States Department of Energy, providing some continuity and background to invest in some projects that helped move the needle forward or backward, I guess it would be, for greenhouse gas emissions. And then, notably, Green Spaces received a grant to develop an integrated community sustainability plan around the same time that the city was also developing a regional resilience plan or report. One of the things that spurred this was the wildfires in 2017. In 2019, we had double the amount of statistical 90+ degree days. We had 95 as opposed to 47. We had a drought. We had a water main break that happened to be on the hottest day of the year, 103 degrees. The first 3 days of October in 2019 were 100, 100, and 99. So in a town where the seasons are one of the most enjoyable thing you can have here, seeing those things change prompted a lot of action. So, but just in practical terms, both the regional resilience plan, which was assisted with a consultant, and stakeholders leadership from the airport to TVA to national parks to our own operations, that was a big process to neighborhood leaders. That informed a lot of that process. Green Spaces process had over 100 contributors from, I believe it was over 20 or maybe 50 organizations, and a lot of sort of boots on the ground people, from professional practitioners to neighborhood leaders and things like that. All of those things, the reason I mention them is that they informed this plan. So when we started this up again about a year ago, it was really an amalgam of all those things, then taking those plans and started to translate those into what that might look like from a practical city operations standpoint. And so as we built out a framework of goal, strategies, and tactics, then we shopped that around with our department heads to get feedback from staff, started receiving those and incorporating those. And so as we were refining that and shopping that out at the same time, the mayor's office was able to share that with EPB and TVA and get some gut check and initial feedback and where we were headed with this. Then in October, the city hosted a National Science Foundation funded climate adaptation workshop. And from that, we took over 20 specific recommendations, and some of that, and with feedback, we started to incorporate more community elements. So from a community resilience standpoint, and more of the equity, disaster response plans, things like that. I think it's been said, and I can concur, this is, a plan has a begin, middle, and end, and steps and funding and those kinds of things. This is a framework for identification of the many challenges that we see, whether it's restoring recreational use of our, primary tributaries to the Tennessee River, making sure we're a zero extinction zone, protecting our natural landscape and hills and slopes, and just the quality of life and the integrity of the resources, that we have a nice balance here, that we are certainly enjoying a lot of growth, but at the same time, when you look at big cities like Houston and Atlanta, there's often not a lot of regard. It's an afterthought. Tear everything down, build something, plant a few trees, come back and go, oh, okay. But the reason people move here, it's one of the reasons I moved here, was for the greater sense of permanence in place, and we want to preserve and improve that while still fostering a growth environment in our economy and elsewhere. So that is kind of the process. So we had the climate adaptation workshop, and then in January, we also, with Green Space's help, hosted a public input session sharing the broader framework of the goals, and fortunately had multiple dense pages of notes from that, and really just about everything was captured already in the plan. So we felt good. We got great feedback from that, from the participants and folks at Green Spaces, about knowing that those concerns are addressed in some way in the plan. And so, when it comes down to specific language in the strategies and tactics, all of this is meant to be a framework and starting point. It's an acknowledgement of where we have been, where we are now, and where we'd like to go. And so we're very much going to lean into further community involvement and a feedback process and loop, to where not only are we reporting out our progress, but leaning into the community. Mayor Kelly said we want to do something that the city can't do on its own, and that whether that's affordable housing or the goals that are outlined in the plan, we know that we can only have so much impact, an important role in that, but certainly not without the help and participation of our community. Mm-hmm. Hope that answered that.
It does, yeah. So you've touched on this a little bit, but I want to dive into it. How is this plan actually going to be implemented? And I guess we should step back and reiterate what we said at the top of the episode, that this plan hasn't been voted on by the city council yet.
That's correct.
But for the sake of the conversation, let's just assume the plan is adopted and we're moving forward with it. How will it be implemented? Is there going to be an overarching framework or a single department that's in charge of making sure all these steps get implemented, or does it go out to each department and they decide the best way to implement the plan based on their own operations? That's
a great question. Certainly city planning will be a large part of establishing an internal implementation team that really will mirror the mayor's cabinet and our department administrator structure. And so we've got to have that leadership from the top, which we certainly have and are very grateful for, the mayor's office advocating for this, supporting this, and already working with departments in different ways, with sustainability being an overriding current in operations. But specifically, we need to have representation in each department and division so that they can internalize this plan and dovetail efforts that are either underway or in planning, that can inform and roll up a report out with various, develop the appropriate KPIs that correlate to the strategies and tactics. And also plan for this thing from a timing standpoint. We realize certainly there's a lot in the plan, and we can't do everything at once. Budget is something that really comes to mind for a lot of folks. The goals are 20, 40, and 50, so we do have some time there. And I think it's just really important to underscore that there are a lot of things that you can do that don't require additional money. You can just do things a little bit differently. Obviously, with electrification of vehicles coming on, that's something that you can do that has a lower life cycle operating cost. Even looking at heavy-duty vehicles, looking at alternative fuels like compressed natural gas or renewable natural gas, those fuel costs could be 50% of what diesel is traditionally. So the short answer is that we have to build out what that entire reporting system looks like. All of that will ultimately be given a framework when we commission a greenhouse gas inventory. Green Spaces did a community-based one for calendar year 2018, I think it was. Their plan was 2019. Ours was 2008, and so we need one that's very specific to the municipal operations and has all those inputs, but also builds on the community one that Green Spaces did, gets a sense of where we are, once again, reestablish that baseline, then also establish a carbon drawdown analysis. What is the lowest hanging fruit? What are the biggest pieces? We know that's a little bit where you get some of the framework in the large 4 focus areas of transportation, buildings, and waste. Green spaces and waterways and jobs and opportunity, that's kind of the lived experience, but transportation and buildings are really the primary drivers, 80+% of our carbon footprint. But within that greenhouse gas inventory, that will help us categorize where we can move and report up, basically establish those KPIs. So that really was just the internal side of things. The external is establishing some sort of forward-facing climate, sustainability, and resilience committee. And we're talking about what that could look like right now, but that is really going to look like leadership across the various sectors of Chattanooga. So everything from people in neighborhoods to hopefully the chamber and our utilities, tourism, all of those things that have a stake and an ability to affect this process. We want that to be sort of the hierarchy of that. And then the reality is, with all these goals, strategies, and tactics, we're going to need to have some subcommittees. So I think it looks like having a very active dialogue with the community, and we will refine the report outs as we engage over the years.
So I want to dive into the goals themselves and kind of take them one at a time, and maybe we can get into what departments might be more involved with some goals than with others.
Sure.
So we'll start with the first one, which is reducing disparities among vulnerable communities. And so I guess let's just start by kind of defining terms. What disparities are we talking about, and how are they going to be measured to ensure progress?
Sure. Well, unfortunately, we don't have a shortage of things to choose from. So in Chattanooga, so close to 40% of the population is economically distressed. Around 30% in the poverty range, and with that come all the other inequities, which is either lack of access to health care, transportation, education, older housing stock. So the kinds of things that impact health through there. There's been some really good initial exploratory work and connections made from anybody from Green Spaces to the Enterprise Center to UTC's community health, to the mayor's office, having Dr. Lambert overseeing community health. So there are an array of issues there. So it's economic, it's social. When you're in that position, you don't have the tools and resources to be prepared, to prepare yourself for job applications and certain skill sets, and just getting there in the first place. So there's an array of work there. We also know that because of all those things, when you have a stressor event, whether it's extreme heat or extreme cold or flooding, people in disinvested neighborhoods are more acutely affected by those things, and so the recovery of those things is also harder. They're often the communication networks often are not what they need to be to where you can lean on a neighbor when that neighbor is needing to lean on somebody too. It doesn't go far, and so what we can do is help to work across the board, community organizations within our own ranks, to identify where we can shore those things up and start to plan for those things. Some things will be known everyday aspects of life, and then other things are going to be harder to, just have a flexible plan to stand up in the event of an emergency, say a weather-related response. What happens if the tornado that hit East Brainerd, the eastern side of Chattanooga, happened in the downtown area? It would be devastating. The support systems might not be there to help folks with that. And so we need to take a hard look at those kinds of things.
So I'm guessing when we're talking about this goal, what departments come to top of mind in terms of who's going to be leading up that effort?
I think it'll be a combination of the mayor's office representatives, but also community development and economic development. And so economic development handles a lot of our federal HUD and community block grant programs. Community development handles a lot of the programming at our community centers, which can, in the right locations, be stood up as resilience hubs, whether it's having 24/7 power supply and or planned access to resources, if it's fresh water, food, et cetera, things like that. So that's part of it. That's sort of the human interface side of it. And then there's other things. Public Works does so much more than what we see on citywide services when they pick up our garbage and recycling and brush and things like that. Just about any project, whether it's the police department or a community development center, it goes through Public Works. Our design group is there, and we're extremely fortunate to have them and sort through the logistics of our challenges. They're really just pros at that, and so those will. It's. I guess you could say that it is as much. The touch points will be more concrete with certain departments, but just about any department the city has is going to have a role. As the city is upgrading pump stations in different neighborhoods, we're looking to do all of that as equitably as possible to make sure that we're not having any unintended consequence of not giving the proper attention across the board.
So I want to move on to the second goal, and this is the one that really caught my eye when I first read through the plan, is net zero carbon emissions for city operations by 2040 and for the entire city by 2050. Yeah. So I guess we'll start by asking, what are some of the tools that are going to be used to make the city operations net zero? Yeah.
A few things. So to go up a level, and this is reflected in the findings of Green Space's greenhouse gas inventory. One of the largest carbon reductions we've seen across the community is due to the change in generation portfolio that TVA provides. So converting coal power plants to natural gas or otherwise significantly they've reduced their carbon footprint 70-ish%. They are 60% carbon free. So those tier 2 emissions are handled in large part there. So the other things that we can do, in addition to partnering with them on things like the TVA Green Invest program that we're going to take a look at, where they aggregate projects, and while they may not be in your immediate service territory of your local power company distributing it, it's a regional improvement, greening of the grid. The more you put on the grid that is green, doesn't have to be replaced with something else. But then from a local standpoint, from a facilities perspective, what we will do is do a portfolio-wide assessment of energy efficiency and host site suitability for solar study. And it doesn't have to be overcomplicated. It doesn't have to go on years and years. We realize time's of the essence on this stuff, so we need to move as quickly as we can in figuring out what the roadmap is and fill in the details on those things. But what I can say is that sort of based on the progress to date, that while it sounds like such an incredibly challenging thing to reach zero, that there are things that are in front of us that we can do and that we've already done. So the city has reduced its raw electric purchase from EPB and ultimately from TVA by 25% since 2012. That's 25 gigawatt hours per year, which is the equivalent of about 1,700 average Tennessee homes and what they consume in a year. And that statistic is cited from the Energy Information Administration. So we've gone from 100 gigawatt hours to 75 gigawatt hours. One of the strategies in the plan is for the regional wastewater treatment facility, otherwise known as Moccasin Bend Environmental Campus. They've been a leader in this space. They've reduced their share of the total power consumption, which is about 55%, so a little more than half of the municipal use. They've already reduced theirs by 30%, largely in part by energy efficiency and just right-sizing the operations that are there. It was established in the early 70s, so plenty of things to do there, but double-digit reductions, and then there's a 4-megawatt solar array that is behind the meter that knocked off another 12 to 13%. That's all behind the meter, saving us over $400,000 a year in avoided retail costs on that. We have an opportunity to capture gas that's produced by biosolids and put that back into the plant. That the strategy overall is to be a self-reliant, from an energy perspective, campus, which is a very big deal.
Yeah.
So from a city buildings perspective, we're closer to 20% in reduction, and we've done that through a variety of tactics. There's an EPA building upgrade manual, and you start with retro commissioning. Make sure your heavy equipment's working right. You benchmark against your baseline. LED lighting is one that we've done. We've done over 60 facilities. We did a 60-plus facility LED lighting retrofit. There are building automation controls that turn the heavy systems off when we're not here, which makes sense. Why would we run things 24/7? And then you dial down from that. The heavy equipment stuff comes later. You don't get a return very well on those things. They're expensive, and sometimes the efficiencies are more gradual than the start, things like LED lighting. And then building envelope. Beyond dealing with our existing buildings, we want to move towards designing net zero buildings, which are going to basically offset any amount of electricity or power that they use. Green Spaces did a net zero homes program that demonstrated that you can, if you design a building right, you can seal it up right, have use efficient equipment, and then offset with some host site solar. You can get very close to net zero. So it can be done, and I think they've demonstrated that you can do that at not a cost to yourself. So that's part of the scheme of looking at our existing buildings. The other big one is obviously decarbonization of our fleet, and so we're going to be looking really closely at an electrification plan for our light duty fleet. Obviously, a lot more products are coming online, which makes that a whole lot easier. Working with EPB on having a strategic electric vehicle charging network, that's not germane to city operations, but to encourage growth within the community. So looking at our zoning and codes to basically doing what we can to encourage the uptake of electric vehicles in the public space. And again, from the medium and heavy duty vehicles, our refuse trucks, things like that, heavier equipment that use diesel, we need to make sure we work with fleet to make sure that they're comfortable with the technologies that are available, and explore things like compressed natural gas or renewable natural gas that we might source from the Moccasin Bend plant, until the heavy and medium duty electrified sector matures. Mm-hmm. Right now it's really, really expensive, close to double what it costs to buy a diesel truck to buy an all electric. Mm-hmm. And so on the order that we do, that's not an economically viable thing to do and a fiscally responsible thing to do with taxpayer dollars just yet. So but we'll obviously keep close tabs on that. That's a lot of stuff, so I can pause there if you have any other questions on.
I guess I have a more step back question. Sure. For a second, and define net zero.
Okay.
And maybe we're not at that point yet where we've really coalesced around a single definition, but I'm hearing all of these things, which are all great, sure. But wondering, when we're talking about net zero, are we talking about 0 point source emissions within the city, or are we talking about, embodied carbon, manufacturing batteries and building materials and solar panels, all of that takes energy and carbon that's harder to account for. Yeah. I mean, it's harder to say we're net zero, including embodied carbon, but I'm just wondering, how is this planned? It's targeting.
Sure. I think that it starts with sort of the tailpipe approach. And as we get further into this, refining how we can further reduce our supply chain impacts. That's another thing that we'll look at, is working with our purchasing division and finance to source as many products as we can that are, responsibly, environmentally, sustainably sourced with a lower carbon footprint. But we realize that, some of the challenges is, one solution may appear as something, it might have an inherent impact. I think that the data shows that, it's easy to say, well, we have to mine batteries and things like that. Well, we mine for fossil fuels.
Right.
It might be a more distant impact that you don't see, but you don't have to look too far back with, the BP oil spill and things like that. There are a lot of consequences that come with different products, and so we will certainly keep an eye on that. I think that the whole thing about the inventory, the greenhouse gas inventory, is at a minimum it will be every 2 years. And so working with a global reporting framework, I don't think I mentioned that, but the ICLEI CDP Carbon Disclosure Project, they have teamed with ICLEI, which is sort of the vanguard, I think, of greenhouse gas inventory. And so when we look at scopes 1, 2, and 3, then we'll be able to better inform ourselves. We're not there, honestly. That's part of this plan, is be a catalyst for digging into those impacts more clearly. So we will inform ourselves and inform our partners, and continue to look for those things. I think also, so as much as possible on the front end, the direct emissions relationship, to vehicles is just an easy example. When we look at CNG, it's at least a 20% greenhouse gas reduction from diesel. If you are sourcing renewable natural gas, which we essentially have on a daily feedstock at the Moccasin Bend plant, you're looking at closer to a 70% greenhouse gas impact, which gets you pretty close to an electric vehicle. But the immediate impact of that is that the trucks that are running through all of our neighborhoods that might already have other social determinants of health that are working against them, that's one less thing. So that's running through and emitting diesel particulates and nitrous oxides, those things. The other is I've heard from some advocates that they see a lot of metals and wire and things like that when it comes to built solutions. I think I try to address it, but that the quality of life here is inextricably tied to our natural environment. There's a certain carbon sequestration capability there, but the Tennessee River Gorge Trust, for example, has the Appalachian Carbon Exchange that they're standing up, and that is not about just getting points for things that you've already done. It's sort of like the state has a no net loss on its wetlands. The idea is not to just say, hey, we've got all these trees, we're good, right? No. So they are doing a rigorous process of identifying plots that can be restored and enhanced and capturing things there. So I think we want to look at options like that that can help us. We need to, my degree is in biology, and so ironically ended up dealing with a lot of energy-related stuff. But that's I think why I don't see the built environment solutions as the be all end all. In a perfect unscathed world, everything's just clicking along, nature's doing its thing. So we need to go to the source as much as possible and not really kind of wash over where we can make those improvements. So I know I've kind of gone over a few things there. So you can reel me back in, but that's so it's going to be a combination basically of just of those point source kind of things, and then also as we have the luxury, I guess. We want to mitigate as much as possible on the front end in broader strokes, and then as we can refine and improve where our product sourcing and things like that are, dig into that and offset that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, the reason I ask, there is a movement to kind of downplay electric vehicles because the battery mining and all this stuff, and it is an issue that needs to be addressed. Absolutely. But in my mind, it's more those kind of edge cases of, do you replace a fairly new gas vehicle with a new electric vehicle? Because now you're talking about not using a resource that's already been built and replacing it with one that requires more energy to build. And so if you're talking about replacing an old vehicle with a new electric vehicle, that's a no-brainer in my opinion. But those edge cases get a little weird. So it sounds like that'll be something that's updated as you go along.
I'm actually glad you made that point, because as I've been in this role for a little more than 8 years now, and going from an ecologist and NEPA person and getting further ingrained in this, these problems didn't arise overnight. The technologies that allowed us to build our society didn't happen overnight, and the improvements that are happening are not happening overnight. I think it's a great point about not throwing out all that embedded impact that still has some benefit, that's still better than what the internal combustion engine that came before it had. So that's why, talking about like CNG, for example, I think it's important. It's not move once on one thing. The consistency, doing things year over year over year, and doing it gradually, so you don't feel the impact on your bottom line. You're not paying for R&D on your own operations. You're allowing those products in the market to mature. You're waiting for the right time and replacing. So the idea again is just get these sustainable concepts rolled into the regular replacement cycle of whether it's a facility or fleet, and to do it better and different the next go around. And so I just think that's a really good point. And something that we will, the city really tries to extend the life of anything that we use, from furniture to electronics, as long as possible, and certainly our fleet. So those things we have on hand for a long time. But that's not to say we're going to wait for those things to really cycle out. We've got to get on it now. And so this isn't a problem or a challenge that any one administration is going to handle in 8 years. And so, we've got to have that consistency. And I hope that with this plan, we will be able to integrate that into the fabric of everything that we do in a way that has lasting impact. And I believe the time's right. I think the community's ready for it. I think we're ready for it. And so I'm excited to see where we take it.
So I want to shift from talking about the public side, because obviously the city government can control what it spends money on, its equipment, its buildings, and it seems to me like 2040 net zero carbon for city operations is an achievable goal. It's a big goal, certainly, but it seems like something can be done and can be moved forward. But I want to move on to net zero community-wide by 2050 and talk about some of the ways that might happen, because now you're dealing with 160,000 people, give or take, that are all making their own decisions. Right. And so what kind of opportunities will be put in place? What kind of tools will be made available? And how will people be convinced, I guess? It's not just a technical battle now, as it is on the city end, but it's a technical and almost a cultural battle.
It is. We live in a home that was built 100 years ago in 1923, and we've done our best to upgrade our HVAC and our windows, and I've got an insulation project. There's kind of nothing, everybody's always got something to do, and to build that into when you look at folks that are economically distressed and just trying to just trying to get their family ahead. That point's certainly not lost. And I don't want to put the answer off to certainly the macro systems that we all rely on, whether it's the power that TVA produces or the vehicles that Ford and GM make or Volkswagen. Those will certainly have a big impact. And when you have manufacturers with goals of being completely electrified by 2035, that's halfway to the goal point, and that will have an impact. But that you have a vehicle, same thing. Well, I just bought this car. Why would I turn it in? I've had it for 2 years. We have a car. My son drives our 2001 Honda CRV, so keep it tuned up as best we can. But so I think that will be choices. I think part of the importance of the city doing a climate action plan and it imploring us to change the way we do business is to create an example that can be followed. If government can get a tough rap sometimes for not being flexible and adaptable, and I think the city of Chattanooga government, to be clear, has done an amazing job over the last several decades of being more fluid. And so setting the tone, setting the bar, proving by example that those things can be adopted over time. But also creating those opportunities where we're doing congestion mitigation with our, the MLK Smart Corridor and integrating signalized intersections so that traffic flows more smoothly based on sensors that they have and other things. One thing I want to make just clear, because it does come up, is there's nothing in this plan that is a mandate for anybody. There is no mandate, and there is no monitoring of any individual, family, business, church, community, what have you. This is all voluntary. It's in the spirit of our maintaining quality of life, our economic prosperity, all of those things. We just happen to recognize that Chattanooga, among every other place, but particularly us, our brand and lifestyle is very much tied to the well-being of our natural environment. And so even if you're just a passive enjoyer of those things, we want that to be available for anybody. But with the specifics, we'll, I think, try to do our best to do education and outreach. There's already things like EPB's free home energy checkups that they can do, and they give you suggestions and ways to do things. TVA has the Energy Right program where you can take advantage of different incentives. Obviously, with bipartisan infrastructure law and some other things from the federal government, there's going to be some incentives there to do some upgrades if you've been on the fence about doing those. So it's going to have to be a pretty shotgun approach of just doing as much by example, making things easier for people, and creating education and awareness around that, to just put those solutions in the hands of folks.
And one thing that comes to mind there, I guess the biggest impact that government can have on private individuals is usually in transportation. It seems to me, just because transportation, it's that kind of nexus of public and private. It's a public road, but private individuals are using it. Has there been much specificity in how the transportation sector in particular is going to be handled if this plan goes through?
So one thing to be aware of, there is, in as much as we are all sort of lining up on the starting line together, I'll say that. So, CARTA has already been doing a lot in terms of forging a path in electrification of its large buses, having an electric shuttle downtown, did a pilot program called Green Commuter, that was a car share opportunity that with electric vehicles that helped, if nothing else, put out an array of additional charging stations. They're looking at how they build routes and serve the community, looking at different options to be agile. Then from the built environment standpoint, I was mentioning traffic signalization, working closely with EPB and UTC on having a more dynamic and responsive system. There's public safety aspects to that. So there are opportunities to combine air quality monitoring with traffic monitoring and traffic redirection to help in that capacity. Just how we design and build roads within our communities is another piece of it. Having multimodal options. Do you have certain things that allow for the free flow of traffic, but also choice? And then the last thing I would mention is our transportation planning organization has federal reporting requirements, and that's this week having active conversations about how we make sure that we dovetail our greenhouse gas inventory scope to make sure that we're also allowing for the necessary capture of data and planning that satisfies the carbon reduction plans that are going to be required from the Federal Highways Administration. And so luckily we've got pros in that shop that can help guide our long-term development, and so to basically create the space, because I think at the end of the day, I've said this to a few folks, is hopefully you don't notice hardly anything other than the benefits. There is no intention to have a hardship like, oh no, you can't have that thing. That's just that those kinds of self-restricting modes, it's hard enough. We've all got our daily lives to get on with, and we are using the tools that are put in front of us from the things that we buy. And so it does. Recycling is another example of that. We have to make that system easy enough, and it's not just how we collect it and distribute it. It's what is the uptake of those materials? How are they getting repurposed to other materials? Because if you're guilt tripping yourself into figuring out which hole you're supposed to put, an object in, is not going to win the solution. We have, it's a dismal statistic, but the amount of plastic manufacturing plants that are being built at this moment to generate more plastic products completely offsets the amount of coal-based energy plants that have been offline globally. So if you think about that, so much plastic is being made that it's offsetting the carbon reduction gains by offlining coal plants. That's a lot. That's a system that's out of our hands. So we want to do everything that we can locally to make things easier for people and just get on with life.
Yeah, and that's a good segue into the third goal. I think we'll have to run through these next couple ones pretty quickly. I'm glad we spent as much time as we did on the net zero carbon, because I do think that is kind of
it's a driver of everything. Flows down from that.
Exactly. It's the big sign at the end of the tunnel. Like this is the big goal.
Yep.
But the next one is related, and like you said, net zero waste.
Yep.
Talking about all the plastic, especially as we move into an era where people are getting more and more things delivered. You order a T-shirt, and it used to be something you picked up off the rack and you took it home.
Yeah.
And now you order a T-shirt and it arrives in 3 layers of plastic and a cardboard box.
Right.
So
again,
what
things
is
out of your control?
Exactly. Yeah. So what is the city going to be doing for their own waste streams? And then how is the city going to make it easier for citizens to be zero waste?
Yeah. So we are we're going to do everything we can to encourage. It's an old adage, but the reduce, reuse, recycle. There is one, education. Reduce as much as you can. Reuse as much as you can. We have a company called iFixit that's coming here, that's setting up shop, that is that's able to be here. They are attracted to Chattanooga because of our ethos here, of our sustainability ethos. They're going to have, I believe, ultimately a couple hundred employees, and the whole purpose there is facilitating the repair of equipment, whatever you have. So designing the manuals to facilitating parts that are needed for those things. That's just an example. So, but from the waste side, we're talking with a couple of people about as you might have seen, we actually have the Hefty Bag program, which is trying to find homes for hard to recycle plastics 3 through 7. We aggregate those, and then they take those and work with partners to create products that are made out of those things. So it could be park benches or pavers and things like that. The recycling industry is, in addition to, that's the mechanical recycling. It's the chemical recycling sector is going to really have to mature, because recycle a plastic bottle once or twice and it's done. It doesn't have it's not like aluminum or paper, sort of an infinite recycling opportunity. So we are going to have to attract businesses that can help us deal with those things. We're not unlike any other city in terms of what we use. We do a pretty comparatively good job where we have recycling options at no cost to the city outside of what's included in their tax. That we are talking and need to get input from people in the other built environment, so demolition of building and holding on to reusable materials. And so that's also actually kind of ties into the character of Chattanooga, the steel beams, the wood beams, the brick, all those kinds of things, repurposing that as much as possible. I'm trying to think of a few others. Again, having lived in a couple other big cities, it's kind of incredible that you can put whatever brush out on your curbside and then go to the wood recycling center. And I've probably put down 20,000 pounds of reused wood mulch that gets mulched right there at the wood recycling center. So thinking about that. Just doing more in education. One of the things that we don't want folks to do is put their plastic bags or bag up their recyclables in their recycling carts. By all means, take your plastic bags to the grocery store and put them in the containers in the front there, but please don't put them in the recycling bin. Recycling is ultimately a business, I'll just say, because it's based on the commodity, which is what they collect. Mm-hmm. And so the condition of that commodity helps translate to a better uptake of those materials. So that's my pitch on that. But one thing I'll just say is I think the solutions that we need for zero waste aren't here yet, and we're going to have to encourage, incentivize the development of the uptake market and technologies, and hopefully we'll be a place that can encourage and grow that here in Chattanooga.
Mm-hmm. So let's move on to the fourth goal. Chattanooga will build a more sustainable city. Yeah. That one was interesting to me because that's pretty open-ended. So what is the intent of that goal? What does that entail with regards to this plan and what it means for the city moving forward? Yeah,
and I think also, to be clear, certain people want their neighborhoods to look different in certain places, and so it is I would say a more interconnected, on the whole, a more interconnected community with access to greenways, sidewalks, all the kinds of amenities that are sort of perks in high-end neighborhoods, but that aren't traditionally available to people, or with the way development has sort of taken course on kind of mega lane, corridors where you might get hit running across the street or doing just using a crosswalk, doing it the way you should do it. We want to have people that have, it's a balance. In my mind, it's a balance. It's a balance of usability of those resources, having green spaces still intact. We know that improves property values long term. Again, I'm from Houston, kind of a slash and burn, no zoning and codes, and so the quality of life that you might move there for doesn't exist after a few years because the things that you moved there for are no longer there. So it's an accessible set of criteria that and I don't want to give it a name that people might associate with anything in particular. You want to have the choice to be able to do what you want to do in terms of how your community's set up. But it's a preservation of what we have, and it's an enhancement of those other resources, whether it's transportation, proximity to your everyday needs, and so a lot of that is a hub and corridor sort of approach.
So goal number 5, that dovetails pretty well. Chattanooga will preserve and improve natural resource integrity. If you could just highlight a few of the key resources that were in mind when the plan was written, and what the city is going to be doing to improve those resources or protect those resources.
Yeah. So I think a quick and easy way to do that is terrestrial versus aquatic. The air quality is obviously an inherent piece of that, and there's not a lot of design and planning other than the resources that you use, the vehicles that you drive, how you move traffic, and the amount of energy. That's why another reason why energy is important, because ultimately that's got to come from somewhere. So, so our tributaries, just in any urban environment, either minimization of vegetated buffers on streams. We've got to remember the crown jewel of Chattanooga is the Tennessee River. The Tennessee River it's not a magical thing that comes out of nowhere. Rivers are formed by tributaries that accumulate, and so the quality of that river is inextricably tied to the major tributaries that we've got. So North Chickamauga Creek, South Chickamauga Creek, Citico Creek, Chattanooga Creek, Lookout Creek. All of those have been impacted in some form or another, and a lot of the times that you can sort of make a general association of that water body's quality to the condition of the surrounding community. And none of them are perfect, obviously, and they all go through different impacts, but whether it's urbanization or an industrial core, things like that. But we want those to essentially have a comparable quality, restoration of recreational use, which is a regulatory term, and it's not an easy one to get to. But basically, we don't want you to fear putting your toe in the creek or pulling a bass out of the creek and wondering too much if you should eat it. There's again a lot of things that are beyond our control for a variety of reasons, but preservation of terrestrial habitats to the extent possible, and or incorporation into long-term planning to where you have buffers and greenways and things like that. Litter reduction is a big thing that I know it's a very visible thing, and that can either be a floatable litter or on your street and sidewalk, and so I know that the mayor's office is very focused on that as well. So it's gonna entail a variety of strategies. And also, I think, again, going back to the education and awareness, building up sort of your civilian team of people who observe and advocate for those things and can bring projects and resources to help restore as much of that as possible.
And then the last goal, Chattanooga will be a leader in the green economy. Can you just talk about what is the green economy? What's the intent there? How encompassing is that? And is there a strict definition of what the green economy is? Or is it something that's still developing as this plan moves forward?
Yeah, I mean, we see some of it already. Obviously, with Volkswagen developing the ID4, that's a real nice, easy one to point to. iFixit is another one. I'm going to get in trouble for it because I know there's a lot of folks out there with businesses that with a focus on that. Greens paint supply, looking at different options for your home that are better for your indoor health. There's any array of companies that provide lighting and electrical work. Those folks we have everyday contractors or vendors here in Chattanooga that have helped put solar on our roofs that hadn't done that work before and are doing it now. So creating opportunities there. The waste piece is going to be a big piece of it. We have compost companies that are setting up shop and or have been here, family businesses that have been here, and they can help on the food waste side of things. again, we have Amnicol, Ohio. We have a variety of industrial opportunity here. So it would, to answer your question, again, a lot of it's in development, hasn't been there before. But I think that the cities across America, if 70% of the population's, I think it's a global statistic, but certainly in America, are anticipated to dwell in city environments by 2050. That just brings everything to a laser focus. So all those pressures on natural resources, all those additional built environment considerations are all there. The amount of wastewater that we'll need to treat, and that's a big reason, not just to fix what needed to be fixed before, but plan for the future. So we want, I think it's a green economy obviously can also include the tourism industry. We want that to remain vibrant and expand. There is also, going back to the built environment, just absolutely no shortage of aging housing stock that needs energy efficiency retrofits. Green Spaces has a fantastic program called Build It Green, and giving opportunities for folks that are either at risk or just don't have the traditional background for various skilled labor positions, and they educate and train and connect with job opportunities for energy efficiency improvements and low-income homes. So there's an entire industry that can kind of be built out. And as far as I understand, part of what the county is also doing with the Construction Workforce Center is upskilling large amounts of our community to be able to handle those challenges that we have. And so I think it can look like a lot of different things, and we want to bring as many good, high-quality, good-paying jobs to Chattanooga as possible, and that just goes back to understanding that all of that is tied back to this long-term sustainability and quality of life that we have.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else that you want to highlight about this plan before we wrap up?
I hope people give it an open-minded look. I hope they think about ways that they can get involved. It doesn't always have to be through the city. Certainly, there's so much that just, whether it's through collective demand for different products or different city resources in the built environment. The natural environment, being an advocate for these kinds of things, but just knowing that this is a long haul approach, and this plan will also be revised and updated as needed as we find, and we do checkpoints along the way and say, hey, we're moving faster along this section than we thought we were. We need to ramp this up. We're gonna revise those tactics, but the intent is to not be a flash in the pan. This is really meant to be a long-term integration of this work into how we do things here, and just to elevate that. So hope people give it a read. Hope they if they don't see something in there that they want, then know that it can probably either fit under one of the strategies and or come out, get involved, look for ways, and we'll continue to. We've updated. I can't remember the URL right off the top of my head, but in the city planning department on the city's website, you can go find the plan. There's some FAQs on there. The mayor's office put up a great video to get a little bit more educated about it and look for checkups. But we're going to basically, as we go into this, we'll have through the Innovation Delivery and Performance Department, have some data dashboards that will be available once we get into the more consistent reporting routine. So just stay tuned for more updates, and hope everybody gives it a look.
Great. Well, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. Really appreciate it.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Chattanooga Civics. Our music was written and recorded by Kevin MacLeod. If you have any questions or feedback, please send me an email at chattanoogacivics@gmail.com. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram @chatcivics, or visit the website chattanoogacivics.com. Thanks for listening.